Hi, I'm Martin and welcome to Turtle JavaScript. Today I will cover React class versus functional components. To skip to any section that interests you, you can find the time markers in the description. I have also linked in the description the text version of the video. You will find there all the code and resources that you may need. React gives you a choice between using a more imperative code style with class components or using the more decorative functional approach with functional components. The fact that React allows you to create components as pure functions is one of the main reasons why I love the framework. This is an example of defining a component in React in 3 different styles. As you can see, the first one, class hello world, is a class component. Function hello world is a functional component using classic function. And arrow hello world is a function component using arrow function. All 3 functions are equivalent in their output, and all 3 produce this. Props are used in React to pass variables to a component. This is how you use it in both types of components. The main difference really is that within the functional component, you need to define props as an argument of the function, and you are not using this. Props are used the same way whether you are using either type of the component. You can see in the script that I'm just defining the value of name, which will show this. Using pure functional components in React is the same as using pure functions in functional programming in JavaScript. This is how you define a pure component with each approach. In a class component, you extend a React pure component instead of React component. And in a functional component, you wrap your function in a higher order function, React Memo. Pure components created this way in React are cached based on their props and inner state values. This means that instead of initializing the whole component each time, React will reuse it with performance gain. The function name Memo is an abbreviation of memoization, which is a functional programming optimization technique for caching computation. Notice that if you use other components within your pure components, their rendering is also cached. This way you can create a component that requires several other components to render, but through this approach everything is rendered only once, and you get performance gains when reusing pure component. Managing the internal state of components will now differ much more between the class and functional components. This is an example of using state in a class component. Notice that the state is defined as an object within the constructor of your class. You can read the current value by simply accessing this state name. We are editing the state then based on onChange event of an input element by using this setState function. Directly editing the state by this state name equals value will not work. And this is the result of the functionality. So let me just type in something and you can see that it changes as I am typing. In functional component, the same result is achieved through using this code. You can see that the functional components still follow the trend of being much shorter, using only 14 lines of code, where we use 22 for the class component. The functional component uses useState React hook to define the variable name and a function setName. If your component needs to keep track of multiple variables, you need to make a call of useState for each of them. The argument that you pass to useState is your default value. The state is not shared or accessible outside of the component, but it can be passed to another component as a prop. Both the class and functional components can still be defined as a pure components without any issue with any of the behavior, and the inner state is bound to each instance of the component. If your component has a limited amount of states, among which it changes through your application lifecycle, it can be quite beneficial to define it as a pure component, using the React pure component for class components or React Memo for functional components as we have shown earlier. Let me just show what happens if you have two of those, that the state is truly just with one of them. Here I go, and I rewrite one of them, and only one of them is rewritten. If you need your application to manage the global state, you should be using either a library such as Redux or use React hooks to build a middleware for a global state that separates your concerns. You may want to manage component mounting, unmounting, and updating. All of these again work with pure components as well. In a class component, you manage the mounting through these functions. The three main states are managed with functions component did mount, component will unmount, and component did update. To test this in practice, we will also demonstrate visibly management and state passing in this script. So I open it up, I see that the component is displayed and it shows the message I mounted. Now I'll change the name. I will see that props or state updated. And I will make the component invisible, and it gives me a message that component is being removed. Now we will achieve the same thing with a functional component. This time the functional component uses 16 lines of code versus 26 lines of a class component. We leverage React hook useEffect, which is intended to watch changes in arrays of variables. When we pass an empty array, like in the first case, the function is called only once the component is mounted, and the function that is returned is then called when the component is unmounted. When we pass the array with props, React will call the function every time props changes, including the first time it is used when the component is being mounted. This same way you could be also watching for any state value. It is generally believed that functional components are faster than class components, and the React team has been promising optimizations to functional components. However, I have not been able to find any proof of a direct performance difference in each approach. In this rendering test, both approaches yield about the same results, and you can see that the class is actually a bit faster. Both the functional and class components in React offer the same functionality. You should not be missing anything when using either of the approaches, and they don't differ in their rendering performance. In the code examples in this video, functional components on average use only half the amount of lines of code. Writing less codes means that your colleagues also need to read less when they try to understand it. In the end, it largely depends on whether you prefer an imperative object-oriented approach with classes, or whether you appreciate declarative functional programming more. For me, functional components are strongly preferred. Let me please know in the comments whether you use class or functional components in your own code. And see you with the next video.